Mabel shouted in alarm and scrambled out of the car. He pushed her back, treating her like his spoilt little sister whom he had caught playing truant. "Sit down and be still. I'm not a monster. I'm trying to help you." He banged the door shut. Back in the car, he threw the loaf of bread on her and stretched his arm to lock the door. Mabel, being an assertive girl, voiced her displeasure at his behavior. "Why did you shove me into the car if you're trying to help?" "I'm sorry if I did. Just be quiet. I'm taking you home." "The bike," she panicked. "I have to take the bike home." "Don't worry, I'll come back for it. You have to get home safely. I hit you, right? And you fell on the ground, right? We have to see to your safety first, right?" He spoke calmly, his voice oozing with false concern. So Mabel sat quietly watching the road, the darkness of the city stretching ahead. She assumed he would not know her uncle's residence, so when they got there, she said, "Please stop the car. That's our house." He sped on. She looked at him, and his silence told volumes of his intentions. "Where are you taking me? Stop the car right now!" She pressed the door handle several times in fury. "Let me out! Let me out!" The windows were rolled up, and the AC was on, but she screamed for help all the same. She felt frantically for her phone, with the grim realization that she had left it at home. She screamed with fear of the unknown, till her voice choked, hitting the windows hard. Where was he taking her? What was he going to do with her? He had seen him before, but she did not exactly know who he really was. Jake turned to look at her, unperturbed. "Xanu girls, high and mighty. I got you girls where I want you," he sneered, turning into his driveway. Jeremy swirled his drink, eyes fixed on the muted news. The police presence was suffocating, and his narcotics business was at a standstill. Strange men loitered around his property recently, claiming to fix electrical poles, but his instincts screamed trouble. He'd sent them away, but the unease lingered. The phone buzzed, breaking his thoughts. "Detective Addison, be at the station in 2 hours," came the curt instruction. "At this hour?" Jeremy quipped, masking his unease. "You running a night shift now?" The detective hung up without a reply. Jeremy cursed under his breath. Was it about the trucks? He alerted his men to stay put and drove off, his thoughts racing. At the station, Addison played CCTV footage of a warehouse, his warehouse, men packing items while a faint voice muttered, "Sir J." Jeremy's stomach churned, but he maintained his cheeky facade. "Hear that?" Addison asked. "Sergeant," Jeremy corrected smugly, leaning back with mock confidence. "I clearly heard Sergeant, not Sir J. Maybe invest in better sound equipment, Detective." Addison's jaw tightened. "Want me to amplify it?" he snapped. Jeremy smirked. "Amplify what? Your lack of evidence? If this is all you've got, I'm leaving. Don't waste my time with amateur theatrics." He shoved his chair back with a deliberate scrape, the sound echoing in the tense room. Without waiting for a response, Jeremy stormed to the door and yanked it open. "Next time, call me when you have something worth discussing." He shot over his shoulder, his voice laced with insolence. The door slammed shut, leaving the detective fuming. Jeremy strode down the corridor, his smirk unwavering despite the storm brewing in his mind. Reaching his car, he dialed his men, his voice calm but firm. "Stay sharp! Something's brewing!" Sitting in the driver's seat, the weight of the moment settled on him. He wasn't just leaving the station, he was running out of time. At Jake's residence, the security guard looked with interest at who would come out of the car. Jake's activities were of great interest to him. It had become a pastime to count the girls and do the statistics on who came to visit Jake and how many times each girl did in a month. He also took time to record the time they spent in the house. He had a notebook for this purpose. Quite an unproductive pastime, he often said to himself, but with nothing interesting about the job of a security guard. It took his boredom away. He saw Jake walk leisurely to open the door for his guest. Now, whoever was in the car refused to come out. "No, I won't. I want to go home. I don't want anything from you except to go home." Mabel began to sob. He flashed a knife and she gasped, slowly pulling herself out of the car. The security man expected one of Jake's usual ladies geared up in fanciful attire, but this one was a child. Could be a cousin or one of Beduwa nieces who dropped by often. He greeted Jake cheerily and got just a nod in return. Reluctantly, Mabel walked by Jake's side into the house. He led her into his bedroom, locked the door, and pocketed the key. Beduwa saw the scene and got extremely worried. "Just pick girls who are willing to follow you and you won't be in trouble. This one is a child." She bemoaned the awful behavior of her nephew. In the room, Mabel refused to sit down as ordered. He laughed quietly and took out a small package from a drawer. He poured a small amount of a white powder onto the back of his hand and sniffed it. He went into an inner room and brought out a bottle of fruit juice. He handed it over to her. She refused to take it. "What's your problem? Don't you like fruit juice? It'll calm your nerves." He tried to push it into her hand, and she hit it away, protesting loudly. Jake drew out his belt. "If you shout, I'll give you the lashing of your life you'll never forget." She whimpered, feeling weak and dazed. He picked the drink from the floor and threw it on the bed. "Drink it!" In the Zanu residence, Karen glanced at the wall clock for the umpteenth time. Mabel was taking too long in coming back. The shop was just 10 minutes away, even on foot. She went to look towards the gate. Concern clouded her expression as she continued tidying up for the night. She went to the gate to look up the road. Instinctively, she dialed their uncle, who informed her he was almost at the gate. Just then, his car lights shone onto the house, and she went to meet him. "Mabel went to buy bread an hour ago and she hasn't returned," she informed him, her brows creases with worry. "Have you called her?" inquired Sam. "She left her phone behind." "You stay in, I'll be back," he called out to her. Hurriedly, Sam reversed and drove out of the house. Sobbing endlessly, Mabel heard the run of the shower. Jake was taking his bath. "What have I done to deserve this?" she lamented. Determined to get out of the house, she went to try the door. She shook the handle noisily and banged on the door, yelling for help. Beduwa heard her and ran cautiously towards Jake's room. She retreated just as his muffled, angry voice sounded. "Where do you think you are going?" He snapped at Mabel. "Come back here. You are disturbing the whole neighborhood. We don't want anyone thinking something devilish is happening here. Stay in the room. You will go home when I say so." Mabel walked lamely back to the bed. "Where do you know me from?" she asked. "I don't even know your name. What have I done to you?" "Go and ask your sister. You girls came into town and you behave as if you are the best of them all. Are your bodies made from a cast of gold? You are not going anywhere until tomorrow. Lie down and sleep. I don't tolerate arrogance from girls, okay?" He went into another room and shut the door. Mabel heard the turning of a key and she burst into tears and flopped onto the bed. When the tears subsided, she went to his door and shook the handle. "Come out and open the door for me. You're asking for trouble if you don't let me go home." She got no answer but a light snoring sound, and she knew she would be stuck there till someone came to her rescue. Sam drove along the road, looking out for anything that might lead him to Mabel. Then he saw her bike. He stopped and walked hurriedly over, looking carefully into the bushes. She might have been knocked down and lying somewhere in the brush. Worriedly, he shone a torch into the gutter and everywhere else, calling out her name. He lifted the bike into the booth of his car and continued to the police station. On the way, he called Karen and broke an uncertain news to her. "I think she has been kidnapped. Come to the station." He heard her sad, painful wail that filled every corner of their home. Somehow Mabel slept and woke up at the break of dawn. She saw Jake coming out of his room just then. "Please, it's morning. I have to go home now. I'm not feeling well. If you don't take me home, something disastrous will happen to me." He grunted. "Please take me home." Suddenly, Mabel began to retch and staggered toward the washroom. A thin, hair-raising wail followed, and Jake rushed after her. She was convulsing, her body trembling violently as a seizure took hold. Panic set in. "What's happening to you? What's wrong?" he stammered, his voice cracking as he grabbed a towel, soaked it quickly and wiped her face. Come on! Wake up!" he pleaded, dragging her limp body from the floor to the bed. Her breathing was faint but steady. Relieved but terrified, he locked the door behind him and rushed to the kitchen. "Beduwa, make me a cup of tea and some toast," he barked, his urgency rattling the otherwise quiet house. He paused before storming back in. "I need it now." Returning to the room, he approached Mabel cautiously, watching her chest rise and fall. She was still breathing. He exhaled deeply, a shaky smile of relief breaking through his tension. But the respite was brief. Needing to clear his head, Jake stepped out, forgetting entirely about his appointment with Roe. As his car crept onto a side street, he spotted a familiar vehicle. Sam's car. His heart thudded as he watched it turn into his lane. A cold sweat broke over him. "I thought scaring one Xanu girl would teach them a lesson," he muttered angrily. "I thought wrong. I've really messed this up. Big time." He waited in the shadows, watching nervously as Sam's car pulled into the gate. Once the gate was locked and Sam was inside, Jake slipped away from the neighborhood, cursing under his breath. Meanwhile, Roe, annoyed by Jake's silence, decided to go to his house instead. He greeted Beduwa hastily and made his way to Jake's room, arriving just as Mabel opened her eyes. A sly smile spread across Roe's face. "Where's Jake?" he asked casually. Mabel shook her head weakly. "Please take me home," she whispered. "I need my medication. I'm very weak." Roe sat down, the sly grin still on his face. "Ah, you sweet little thing. Come here." He reached out and grabbed her hand. She yanked it away, her voice trembling with defiance. "Let go of me." Roe chuckled. "Nothing will happen to you, sweetie." His tone, dripping with malice, sent chills down her spine. As he ignored her desperate pleas, Mabel's voice grew frail with exhaustion, the realization of her worsening nightmare settling in. Much later, Beduwa saw Roe leaving the house and grew suspicious, especially since Jake was not around. Stealing into the room, she found Mabel lying awkwardly on the bed. She tapped and shook her gently. "Please, take me home," Mabel moaned. "I'm too weak. I need my medication." Her speech was slurred, her energy completely drained. "Naughty little girl," Beduwa scolded. "You came here yesterday, and you're still here." "I didn't follow him here," Mabel murmured, mustering strength. "He kidnapped me." Beduwa froze. "Are you sure of what you're saying?" Mabel, with a trembling voice, recounted the events leading to her being brought to the house. "He brought me here instead of taking me to a hospital. My family is looking for me. Please, help me." Just then, Jake's car revved in the driveway. Beduwa froze in confusion, her mind racing. "What should I do now?" she muttered to herself. She helped Mabel sit up. "Come on, get up. Let's get out of here," she urged, her voice trembling. Beduwa half-dragged Mabel out of Jake's room and into hers. She whispered to her not to make a sound and locked the door. Beduwa braced herself for the tirade that would follow. Jake, unable to find Mabel, went from room to room. When he reached Beduwa's door and found it locked, he headed to the kitchen. "Why do you always lock your door?" he asked sharply. "That's my room," she replied coolly. "Have you been trying to get into it?" And what exactly have you been looking for? Where is the girl I left in my room? Jake asked calmly, ignoring her questions. Jake, do you introduce your girls to me so I know when they come or go? Well, I saw a little girl trying to run out of the house. She couldn't even walk properly. Is that the one you're looking for? Beduwa shot back. Jake hurried away, muttering threats. If I don't find her, you'll see where your next meal will come from. Ha! Beduwa snorted. My meal? He doesn't know what kind of meal he'd be having in prison if he doesn't stop this foolhardiness. She quickly picked up her phone and dialed a friend. Wofa, come right away. I'm in trouble. No, I'm in somebody else's trouble. The weather smells of rain. Please hurry. Call me when you're close to the house. Meanwhile, Jake walked along the road, searching for Mabel. The rain had begun to drizzle when Wofa arrived at the house. Beduwa prayed silently that Jake wouldn't return just then. Wofa drove to the kitchen entrance, and together they carried Mabel into the car. The security man, now privy to the situation, shook his head in disbelief. All my life, I've never seen a more determined candidate for Miscreant of the Year, he muttered. Just as they left the house, the rain intensified. They drove through the quiet suburb, unsure of what to do next. Where are we taking her? Wofa asked. What about the hospital? Beduwa suggested tentatively. No, madam, Wofa replied. They'll ask for information, and if she isn't your ward, it could complicate things. What about the police station? Beduwa asked, though she knew the answer. Wofa shook his head. They might arrest us for her condition. Too risky. Okay, Beduwa said hesitantly. What if we leave her in front of a house and ring the doorbell? No, Wofa said firmly. That's also risky. Someone could see us. Just hold on, I know exactly what to do. In the pouring rain, they carried Mabel out of the car and placed her under a bush on the outskirts of town. Then they called the police to report finding a girl lying by the roadside. Within minutes, the police arrived, accompanied by Sam and Karen. It was Mabel, unconscious and drenched in rain. Meanwhile, Jeremy decided to retreat to his second house for a few days to avoid distractions. Packing a few necessities, he drove off, arriving at the secluded property by midnight. The caretaker opened the door without a word of greeting. Jeremy went straight to the shower and then to bed. The next morning, he spent a lengthy phone call speaking in hushed tones. Afterward, he summoned the caretaker to open the shed full of cow dung, sacks, and baskets. As his eyes scanned the heap, a brilliant idea struck him.